Hey everyone, I just want to thank our sponsor, HostGator. HostGator is bringing you film talk as it does every time. Every time we do a film talk, HostGator is there. They are a leading provider of shared, resold VPS and dedicated hosting solutions. They have award-winning support available 24/7, 365 days a year via phone, email, and live chat, any which way you can think of, maybe even carrier pigeon, who knows? You can discover why over 9 million websites trust HostGator and use HostGator. And if you would like to sign up for a new hosting package, which you should, you can use the coupon code GAMEITALL and receive 25% off your first hosting plan.
I've had a lot of strange experiences after all these years in the film business, but I have to say the Fantastic Four ranks somewhere near the top.
It's clobbering time.
Like a phantom, this film.
Strange.
It was like a feeling that I've never experienced before.
It's a piece of history.
I never would have thought then, was it 20 years later, that I'd be sitting here talking about it.
This thing just won't die.
Expect trouble.
I didn't know then, all of the machinery that had been at work.
It was the seedy, dark side of Hollywood.
We really wanted people to see this.
How many movies did Roger Corman make and never release? One.
Wait a minute. Why? We're gonna let them take this movie away from us and not get anything out of it? We gotta show people that we made a movie. That's how you get another job.
All this effort, time, and all the work that went into making that film, and that pointless, meaningless.
This film was never really intended to be a film. I said, oh yeah? You watch.
I think this documentary is I think it's about time.
Hopefully, we might be like the last piece of this whole puzzle.
The great, untold, never-seen version, the original Fantastic Four.
Finally, after 20 years, this story is going to be told.
Unfortunately, this version of the Fantastic Four really was doomed.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Film Talk here on GameItAll.com. This edition is a very interesting guest. When you hear about his latest project, we have director Marty Langford here.
Hey, how are you?
Great, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, kidding me? It's great, thank you.
Now, as soon as I got an email about this, it piqued my interest immediately, because you are currently promoting a film, a documentary film, about the making of a Fantastic Four movie that never happened.
Yeah, more or less. That's about it. Yeah.
Now, as far as I know, the film was completed, but basically never officially released.
Right. Yeah, it was back in 1992. Roger Corman got a call from the rights holder of the Fantastic Four. It was this German company called Constantine Films. And for some reason, they needed Roger to very, very quickly and very, very cheaply make a feature film of the Fantastic Four. He called him in like August, and he had to start production by the end of the year, by December 31st, for a very specific reason. And Corman, the businessman he is, took it and ran with it and made the movie.
Yeah, and this is a man. I think he famously said something along the lines of, "I've made like hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of movies, and hasn't lost a dime on one because he makes them super fast, within budget and on time."
Yes, and he's completely was and still is kind of self-sufficient. He is his own studio. He has his own sound stages. He has his own, crews and cast, his own distribution. He owns, the copyright on every film that he makes, with very few exceptions, this one being a big one. He was just, odd for him, a hired hand, and they just needed him for his production services, which was odd, and the facts surrounding it proved just how odd it was,
It is a very there's quite a bit of controversy surrounding this whole ordeal, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what came out and what's pretty publicly known is that Constantine Films needed to make a version of the Fantastic Four before the end of 1992. At the end of 1992, their option was going to lapse, and they would no longer have the rights to the Fantastic Four, something that they had for a decade, and they weren't able to put together, the movie they wanted to make. They had been dealing with 20th Century Fox, but the Fox deal just was not happening fast enough, so they desperately, hired Corman to make this cheap jack version just so they could retain the rights. And if they were able to start production by, midnight on December 31st, 92, then they would retain the rights to the Fantastic Four, something that they did succeed in. And I mean, proof of it is Josh Trank's version of the FF from last year, was a Constantine Films production. So they've been able to hold on to those rights, for over 20 years just because of this last-ditch effort they made in 92 to have Corman make a version of the movie. And yeah, as you stated, that version has never been released, never been legally seen, and has been sitting on a shelf for all this time.
And now, I wanted to mention as well, looking back, a film like this having been rushed, that might seem weird now because of the grand scale and the budget of most of these movies. But at the time, the Marvel movies before that were fairly low budget and nondescript, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, 92, I'm old enough to remember that pretty well. I graduated high school a few years before. And yeah, man, we were looking at like Dolph Lundgren's The Punisher, the Captain America movie that Albert Pyun directed with Matt Salinger, the really awful version. The big change was Batman. That came out in '89, and it kind of, it proved that you could do something with these properties. Unfortunately, Corman wasn't able to do much with $1 million that Constantine gave him, with these four superpowered people, battling each other with what you would need to be some serious special effects, and that was something that, he danced around, but it's a cheap looking movie for sure.
Yeah. Would you say that maybe because Batman was so successful, that maybe opened the floodgates a bit to allow for more of a budget, because the studio was expecting it to do, like, for those types of movies to do a lot better? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Constantine, I mean, they're a smart company. They knew, they had Fantastic Four. Batman had come out and been enormous, and they were saying, gosh, we've got, four heroes in this property. And, if we can put together, a good enough project, we could have that and share that success. The problem was that they just couldn't do it within the time frame that they had the option. And as the end of 92 was moving along, they were like, well, crap, we've got to get rolling or we're going to lose any possibility of making any kind of big budget feature later on. So again, they hired Roger to just do this version with the hopes that, all right, we'll hold on to the rights. We have them for another 10 years, and then we can go back to the bigger studios and try to put together, a worthy project. They definitely saw this version as unworthy.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's just an odd situation. Like, I understand what they were trying to do. It's unfortunate for the people involved in the original production, for the actors, definitely.
Well, that's the tragedy of this, is because they didn't know. Nobody involved, from Corman down, kind of knew what to expect. They just thought they were making a movie and that they'd make it and it would come out. What happened was Constantine, really, depending on who you believe and whose quotes you listen to, they never intended for this, to be released. It was just part of a, development process that cost them $1 million, and they happened to have a movie that they could put on a shelf and go on with Fox to make this big blockbuster movie with Christopher Columbus.
And especially with Corman, he's going to keep it fairly low budget. So, I mean, that's not a huge financial loss for them as well.
Right, not at all. $1 million is nothing compared to, the hundreds of millions, that they've made on the property since '92, up until, I mean, they're negotiating with Marvel Studios, even to this day, to, make more Fantastic Four movies.
So then I'm curious, because in the documentary, we do see a few, well, actually quite a few. There are quite a few clips of the sort of lost Fantastic Four movie, I guess.
Yeah.
And now I'm guessing you've seen quite a bit of it, if not the whole thing.
Oh, sure, yeah. And the thing is that, I mean, even though it was never released, and even though it's illegal to own it or to screen it, versions of it leaked out. So I mean, you can go on YouTube right now, type in Fantastic Four 1994, and the whole movie is on YouTube. You can see it. Anybody can see it. The quality stinks. It was generated from VHS masters, duped down however many times. But anybody that wants to see it can see it. And it's just that it's never been kind of officially released in a state that the people who made it would be proud of. Ole Sassoon, the director. I mean, I've seen copies of it from Ole and from the other people. And when they made the trailer for it originally, they did proper color correction. They had finished effects. They had a beautiful audio mix. A version of it exists that's gorgeous, but it's never been seen.
Now, do you think if it had gone well and the film had been finished, and had been released and everything, do you think it would have done well? Do you think it would have had a decent run in theaters, like at least on a limited scale?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. The answer is it would probably have done okay. I mean, I think you could just look at The Punisher and Captain America that had come out the years before as a barometer of just how well it would have done. Corbin would have made a few $1 million. It would have ended up on video as part of, the Concord New Horizons library, and it would have been done. We wouldn't be talking about it today. The whole reason why it's become such an interesting story is because it was shelved. That's the story. And it's a charming little movie. I mean, it's definitely not this, this piece of crap. It's good, It's not great, but it's good. And you can tell that the people who were making it were invested in it, and they saw it as being this opportunity. This was going to be a stepping stone for them to, have big careers, make sequels, and they really did get screwed.
And that's the thing too. I mean, you can have a bad movie where everyone looks like they don't want to be there, but then I feel like this is a movie where you could see everyone was honestly trying to make the best they could out of the situation.
Yeah, they absolutely were, from from Ole the director to each of the principal characters, the actors, Alex Hyde White and Joseph Culp were the two, Reed Richards and Dr. Doom. And it was funny. I mean, Jay Underwood, the actor that played Johnny Storm, Human Torch. I mean, he was probably the biggest star at the time, the most recognizable kind of character actor. He was in Uncle Buck. That was his kind of breakout role. He played the boyfriend of the older daughter that John Candy was taking care of. And he had a couple of Disney movies. What was it? The Not So Human. I think there were 3 or 4 movies. And he was, a legit actor on his way up. But the others saw this as their breakthrough, and they busted their asses to do the best they could.
And now I'm gonna go back even further. Before you started making this documentary, how did you get on board with this? Did you just hear about the story and kind of get interested from there? Did you have any contacts already when you started?
Yeah, well, the cool thing is, and the impetus for the whole thing was my executive producer, Mark Sykes. I grew up with him. I live in Springfield, Massachusetts, even still. Mark and his dad owned a comic book store that I worked at. Mark and I became friends. When Mark got to be in his kind of mid-late 20s, he moved out to California in the early 90s, and he ended up interning for Roger Corman, and ultimately became his receptionist at the time in 92 and the casting assistant. So Mark worked at the studio when all this was happening. So, he would feed me information, he'd make calls, and he's like, "Oh my God, dude, you got to see the Thing costume. It's awesome. Oh my God, dude. They show Reed stretching. We were on location today, and there was all these effects," and he was like thrilled. And Mark and I maintained a friendship. And 3 or 4 years ago, when this project we first started talking about it, I contacted Mark, and he's now, a legit casting director in Hollywood. So he was able to reconnect with everybody that was involved back then. And if it wasn't for Mark, this documentary wouldn't exist. So I mean, I was lucky to know him. Plus, I'm a comic book geek and I'm a film fan, and I love like lost movies, and I love intrigue with production histories in certain films, and it was just interesting to me all around.
Yeah, I share your enthusiasm on lost films. I mean, like, there's the whole famous thing with Jerry Lewis having made like a Nazi clown movie, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's it's funny because there's little precedent for what happened with Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. It's unique in kind of the history of cinema, and there are other instances of lost films. That the Day the Clown Cried, the Jerry Lewis thing is probably the most well known. There's been films that have never been released, and there have been films that have disappeared. But the reasons why it happened to this one, I think, are unique in the history of kind of Hollywood, and it's just such a great, compelling story. You've got heroes and villains and deception and corporate greed and duplicitousness, and it's just a really good story.
I mean, the documentary right there is a fiction film on its own.
Yeah. So did you like
villains and everything?
Yeah. So I can't quite remember. So did I send you a screener for it? Have you seen the doc?
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed it. I like it.
Did you? Oh, good.
And it seems to me like if the film had been released, I feel like that would be like the documentary accompaniment to it. You know what I mean? Like on
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Precisely. It would be this. What a world it would be if the original Corman film, kind of was released, and you put it together in like a 2-disc package with my documentary. It's just ideal.
I'm honestly surprised that it hasn't been released. You get so many of these like rare movies coming out, like Criterion and everything, and this seems like something you'd want to release, especially with the release of the last movie, right?
Right, yeah, and I'm always asked, what do you think the chances are of this movie coming out? And I mean, I vacillate between, it'll come out one day, to, yeah, they're never going to release this. And it's such a kind of mired, of confused mess of rights as to who actually, owns this movie and where the negative resides, and who it would be who would release it. Is it Marvel? Is it 20th Century Fox? Is it Constantine Films? Is it Roger Corman? It's just so mixed up in rights issues that maybe it's impossible at this point for it to come out. I don't think so. I think that I have a good idea where the movie is, and I have a good idea with we have to go through a lot of legal issues with this. Going back and forth with lawyers and being careful about what we said about whom. But if this, there is still a shot, I think, for that movie to come out. I really hope there is.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you said there was a lot. So you're saying when you made the documentary, you had to be careful with like some of the comments towards some of the.
We kind of did, yeah. There was an instance actually. We put a trailer out for our movie about a year ago, and we were getting really good press at the time. This was when the Josh Trank version came out, and we had a lot of press going on about it. And our trailer, we got up to I'll tell you exactly. We had 472,000 views on our trailer. And one day I woke up and I went to go see the view total, and it had gotten taken down for copyright infringement from Constantine Films in Germany. And we were like, oh boy. And that started this process of having some difficulty in making sure that we, had the lawyers look over everything, and every sound and clip and image had to be cleared before our distributor, felt good enough to say, okay, or just good enough to get the insurance that he would need to protect all of us. Because, it hasn't happened yet. We haven't had that cease and desist. We haven't had that screening where those, the lawyers or the briefcases are waiting outside to, arrest me. Yeah. But it's not to say it still couldn't happen. They could wait until, we're coming out on October 11th, and October 10th, we could get a letter saying, hey, you better not come out tomorrow. I hope not.
You could fall, it sounds like a similar situation of what happened to the actual movie.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We've been, it's been 4 years in January from when I started this, and there have been people who have known about it since the early days, and they've been waiting patiently. People who helped out with our Indiegogo campaign and who had pre-ordered copies of the film. They've been waiting patiently for years, and they were like, is this thing ever coming out? Is this just a repeat of what happened, 20 years ago?
So October 11th, you mentioned was the release date, correct?
Yes, that'll be out on that's kind of our video on demand, release will be on, oh gosh, pretty much everywhere. We'll be on DirecTV and the Dish Network. We'll be on, Charter, Comcast, Xfinity, Time Warner, Vudu, Amazon, iTunes. We'll be everywhere on October 11th. And then on December 20th is when the DVD and the Blu-ray will come out. And we've got, crazy special features and, behind the scenes stuff and extended interviews and, and then first quarter 2017, I'm sure we'll see the Red Box and the Netflix and all that. But October 11th is the big one. That's when, everybody will be able to call it up on their on-demand system and watch it finally.
Well, yeah, and I was talking to someone a few days ago about that. They also had a film coming out on many cable systems. So for those of you listening here in Canada, if you have Rogers Cable, I think it might also be on that as well, because I noticed it was on there for this other guy's film, and he didn't even know about it. So.
Yeah, and we're actually too. We have a few theatrical dates, two of which are actually up in Canada. It's playing, and I wish I knew the theaters, and I don't. But it is premiering that weekend of whenever the 11th is. I think. Actually, I guess it's maybe the 8th, which is the previous Friday. It'll be playing up in Montreal, a theater in Montreal, and a theater in Toronto. But I'm not sure exactly what the theaters are. And we'll be playing kind of a bunch of different theatrical engagements that weekend as well. But they're still talking and making deals, and I have no idea where it's going to be playing. But that's cool. You had somebody that didn't even know they were going to be available?
Yeah, I just thought to check, and because I have Rogers, just plug in Rogers now. I have the Rogers cable system here, and it just showed up on the on-demand service. So, I'll check it out on October 11th and see if it's showing up here.
Oh, yeah, please do, definitely.
Now, I guess my last question is, because in the film you mentioned a couple people that you were unable to get a hold of. I can understand why they were difficult. One being obviously Stan Lee, and the other being Avi Arad.
Yeah.
Now, what was there? Now, was that like quite a process, or did you just like, I'm just gonna call them and see what happens and?
Yeah, we actually got fairly far along with kind of Stan Lee, not with his, I guess you call him this, with Stan Lee's people, We contacted him, there was discussion, he was interested, there was a show in Denver, I believe it was, back in 2015, which would have been last year, I think, no, 14, I think, and we were kind of set to go to Denver and interview Stan. And then they just said no. They just kind of pulled it, and he said he's no longer interested in talking to him. So that sucked. And with Avi Arad, Avi was, like the head guy at Marvel at the time, and he was the one who was really pushing for the Marvel properties to be exploited through animation. He was behind the X-Men cartoon and theatrical, so he was huge on that. So, it was in his best interest and Marvel's best interest, quite frankly, that this movie did not come out.
Yeah.
And Avi was involved in kind of the cover-up, or however you want to refer to it. Stan. I don't think either of them will be kind of happy with our movie. Stan especially, he had some things to say about it, and we have some things to say about him. And the big guy who we would have desperately loved to have spoken with was the president of Constantine Films, Bernd Eichinger, who passed away in the early 2000s, I believe. So, he's the one who knows everything. And unfortunately, he's also, he was unavailable, to tell us.
And I gotta say though, like as far as especially Bernd Eichinger, you don't necessarily demonize him in the movie either.
No.
The director Ollie has some decent things to say about him as well.
Yeah, that's the thing too. As I was making this movie, we interviewed goodness, 17 people, I think, and we ultimately had like 90 hours worth of interview footage. And before I went into it, I wasn't quite sure like who the villain, was going to be. Movies, regardless of if they're a documentary, any kind of narrative needs, conflict, and that's usually like a bad guy. And there's a couple of bad guys who are at varying kind of levels of badness, but nobody was evil. It's just kind of a story of corporate greed and of what people's bottom lines, were going to be. And we certainly don't demonize Bernd Eichinger, nor Stan Lee or Avi Arad, but they were all involved, and there was a lot of deception that was going on that they were each a part of.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, hey, I want to mention again, that movie comes out on October 11th to on demand pretty much anywhere. And if you have your cable system in Canada, I believe it'll probably be on Rogers, and it'll also be, you said, on Charter Cable in the States as well.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And just check out our Facebook page, Doomed FF, on Facebook or Twitter, and I'll actually look into the Canadian release, and I'll try to get you the names of the theaters that they're coming out in, Brendan. So maybe you can go check one out opening weekend.
Awesome, Toronto, Montreal. All right, well, hey, I want to mention again, that movie comes out on October 11th to on demand pretty much anywhere. And if you have your cable system in Canada, I believe it'll probably be on Rogers, and it'll also be, you said, on Charter Cable in the States as well.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And just check out our Facebook page, Doomed FF, on Facebook or Twitter, and I'll actually look into the Canadian release, and I'll try to get you the names of the theaters that they're coming out in, Brendan. So maybe you can go check one out opening weekend.
Awesome, Toronto, Montreal. All right, well, hey, thank you very much, and good luck with the release. Hopefully you don't run into any lawyers with briefcases.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. This is great. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you.